record the webinar. Just wait a minute. So welcome everyone to Irrigation Orientation. My name is Yiling Zhang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in IFAS Extension Central District. I'm housed in Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka. So Amanda, if you can move to the next slide. So now Irrigation Orientation is an 8-week-long webinar series focused on residential irrigation. Now we are in the middle of this webinar series. So you can see it. So we already covered the basics of water and how to water according to your plant need, and also show you some common landscape mistakes. In the last week, we went through some do's and don'ts of reclaimed water. If you missed the past webinars, you can send me an email request links to the recordings. In the meanwhile, we are building our webpage, the Irrigation Orientation webpage. Eventually, all the fact sheets, presentations, and the recordings will be housed on that webpage. During the time being, if you want to have the access to the recordings, please send me an email. I will put my email in the chat box so everyone can see it. And today, we will switch gear again, because every week you can see our topics are quite different. They're related, but quite different. So this week, it's more specific. It's how do I maintain my zoysia grass? And I have my guest speaker here. It's Miss Amanda Marion. She is the Florida-friendly landscaping agent in IFAS Extension, Marion County. Now let's welcome Amanda.
Thank you, Yilin, and welcome everybody. So let me go ahead and progress. So you guys are here probably because you have zoysia or you're thinking about zoysia grass. I do know, I saw in the chat box, many of you live out on top of the world. And so I do know for sure you have zoysia as well as St. Augustine out there. So this week we will be particularly focusing on the good aspects and unfortunately, the bad aspects of zoysia grass, and trying to figure out exactly how to make zoysia happy, because I know for some of you, for a lot of you, the zoysia really tends to be a bit touchy. It tends to be a little bit problematic. So what you'll hopefully take away from today are some tips, some very basic tips on some simple, easy things you can do to help promote a healthy zoysia lawn. So just a quick introduction to extension. We'll start with the good. We'll start with why we love zoysia. Then we'll go into why we hate it, what it wants from you to really be happy, and what to do when things get rough. So first of all, like Elin said, my name is Amanda and I'm at the Marion County Extension Service. So those of you in the Marion County, especially Ocala area, our office is in the northern end of Ocala. So please feel free to visit us Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but we also have some absolutely lovely demonstration gardens that our master gardeners maintain, and that's open 24/7. So if you ever want to just come by and get some inspiration and some ideas, you're more than welcome. Or if you run into an issue with your zoysia, we do have our plant clinic at this location, as well as agents such as myself here to help. If worse comes to worse and we cannot figure it out, well, that's when we'll reach out to the very intelligent, smart people up on campus to help us figure out and diagnose particularly what is going wrong. We utilize the Plant Diagnostic Center quite often, as well as the nematode lab. So let's start first with the good, why we love zoysia. So zoysia is one of those grasses that a lot of people, particularly from up north, they miss their Kentucky bluegrass. They miss that nice carpet-like lawn. Unlike St. Augustine, that tends to be kind of thick and rough, the zoysia grass is much finer, much more like that carpet-like look that a lot of people are going for. It does have fewer weeds if it's healthy and growing strong. It is more tolerant of herbicides, more so than St. Augustine grass. It does have moderate shade tolerance. Now, I put a little asterisk next to this because zoysia really does best with sun. So if you've got an area that doesn't get at least 6 hours of full sun, it'll definitely start to struggle and to thin out. So I'll say moderately, but ideally you want it in full sun. Also the benefit to Zoysia and why so many neighborhoods utilize it, such as on Top of the World, is that it tolerates a wide variety of soil types. So some of our other lawns need it acidic, but Zoysia and St. Augustine both tolerate those higher pHs that are very common in many of our, especially newer neighborhoods. Now, Zoysia, when it first came out, a decade or so ago, it was touted as being the more drought-tolerant alternative to St. Augustine. Well, research has shown over the last few years that's not the case. It needs just as much irrigation, but it does need less nitrogen fertilizer than St. Augustine to be green and happy. So why most of you are probably here, why you hate Zoysia. So unfortunately, the biggest issue with Zoysia is it does tend to be pretty susceptible to pests and diseases, particularly many fungal diseases like large patch and root rot. The large patch and the root rot is what we see most often, particularly this time of the year. Rainy season, we have been getting almost daily calls about root rots in our lawns. Zoysia, St. Augustine, either one. The problem with Zoysia is particularly in the spring, you'll see that disease there, large patch. So unfortunately, with our warming climate, we're seeing these diseases practically year round. So you'll see large patch, in the spring, and then root rot hits in the summer, and then it can carry through into the fall. And so it's just this ongoing cycle. So unfortunately with Zoysia, it tends to go dormant first, and it wakes up from dormancy last, and it tends to be more slow growing. So these diseases, particularly root rot, which is bad right now, it tends to take Zoysia quite a while to really fill in those bad spots. Dollar spot is one that I actually just saw again this week. Of the two, large patch and root rot, dollar spot is not nearly as severe. It'll create this patchwork, and I'll show you pictures. Oftentimes confused for dog urine damage. And then lastly, unfortunately, it's also susceptible to insects, which we'll also get into. So the biggest things here is making sure that Zoysia, just like St. Augustine, needs just as much water. It does also form thatch. It does need to be mowed short. Okay, so that's very important for Zoysia, that it needs to be mowed short, about 2.5 inches. This is a photo that I took. Those of you out at On Top of the World should recognize the landscaping because this was taken in your neighborhood. It's not just an issue there, it's an issue everywhere, but particularly in areas that have very compacted soils. So, which is very common in new neighborhoods with a lot of builder clay and a lot of soil compaction. Also, we see it almost time and time again. I have a photo here, yes, in this swale area. This is typically where we see root rot. The houses are close together. You tend to have irrigation systems for homeowner A and homeowner B. Both areas are watering that same spot. And if you're not on the same schedule, homeowner A could be watering 2 times a week, homeowner B another 2 times a week. So ultimately, these small, narrow areas, they may get irrigated 4 times a week or more. Plus, there tends to be less sunlight and airflow. So usually, if there's going to be a spot with root rot, it's in those swale spots. And builder code mandates that those areas be low-lying because you want the water to drain out away from your home. So this, again, a picture of root rot along the road. The underlying #1 cause for root rots is too much moisture, too much water, either from irrigation, rain, or both. And then, of course, it's Florida. We're hot, we're humid, we got, molds, fungal spores everywhere. So it just kind of comes with the nature of the lawn, unfortunately. This is a close-up, and like I said, this is all root rot. these tall established shrubs, if you've got irrigation such as this, the shrubs have been in the ground for more than 2 years, they're well established, you can cut the irrigation off to those shrubs, to this landscape bed. Because unfortunately what you see here is this area, again, swale, getting too much water, plus the irrigation runoff from the beds. It's just too much irrigation, you end up with dust. This is a St. Augustine grass sample. The roots on St. Augustine tend to be thicker and wider, so you can see it better. So you see, short, black, stubby roots, no root hairs. These roots should be easily 6 inches long, whitish brown, covered in fine root hairs, and you don't see that. You see short, black, stubby roots that are rotted, and that is exactly what the disease does, unfortunately. So cut off the irrigation to the landscape if it's established, and really try to communicate with your neighbor if you have control of your irrigation, so that you guys are really together collectively reducing how much irrigation gets to those spots. It does affect all warm season grasses. Like I said, most damage we see during the wet season, but no kidding, we have gotten positive results for root rot damage back in the winter. It's just, unfortunately, with the warming climates, hot or wet winters, you tend to get it. Okay. The other one that is very problematic with zoysia, large patch tends to be far worse in zoysia than some of the others because of that characteristic I said before. It goes dormant last, which means, probably by November, mid-November, that grass is already dormant. Unfortunately, folks tend to overwater, particularly through the winter months. So large patch may not rear its ugly head until spring, but in actuality, that disease started months ago, back in October, November. With zoysia going dormant so soon, it doesn't need nearly as much irrigation. And you also really have to make sure you don't fertilize too late in the season, because if you do both, one or the other, particularly irrigation, come May, when your grass should be nice and green and filling in, you see this. And this, unfortunately, is very unpleasant and difficult to eradicate. The fungicides, which this will need a fungicide, fungicides work far better as preventatives than they do as treatments. So once it gets to this point, yes, you can use fungicides, but it's not going to cure what's already infected. The fungicides will help keep it from spreading, but it's not going to cure what's already infected. You just kind of have to wait it out. Large patch, similarly to root rot, affects all warm season grasses, but tends, like I said, to be really problematic in zoysia. Most of the damage is likely in that November to May period. We have seen it, repeat itself year after year after year, which is unfortunate because once you get one of these fungal diseases, you're more likely to see it pop its head up again the next year. With the large patch, it does not affect the roots. What it does affect is the blades themselves. So the base of the leaf blades will be rotted, and then the rest of that blade will die back. So you'll see these very characteristic yellowish brown margins and these patches. Right? It dies back in very distinct round patches. And large patch is triggered, again, by too much water or over fertilization, particularly in the fall when zoysia wants to start going dormant. Dollar spot, this is one we just saw last week. Very common. It is pretty common, but it mimics that pet waste damage. So some people will see this and think it's their neighbors walking their dog. And yes, that can happen. But this is actually a fungal disease called dollar spot. It starts in these little patches that can coalesce into a larger area. Of all of them, less to worry about. The damage can get severe, but usually it's one of those that just kind of works its way out. Fungicides would help prevent it from spreading and getting worse. but you'll see these little, sunken patches that then coalesce into a larger area. And on the leaf blades themselves, you'll see spots with like these dark brown or reddish margins. So that's characteristic there of that dollar spot. This one is actually triggered by too much thatch. So if you have a zoysia lawn that's been in the ground for a few years, and to your knowledge, it's never been thatched, that'll definitely help reduce the instance of dollar spot, as well as some other issues like chinch bugs. So, usually about once every 2 years is the recommendation to get it dethatched. The other trigger for dollar spot, known by research, is actually nutrient deficiency. So if you or your landscaper is not fertilizing appropriately or at the wrong time of the year, that nutrient deficiency also makes it more susceptible. And the biggest cue is frequent leaf wetness. So we'll get into how to make your grass happy, but with dollar spot especially, it's really important you only irrigate late or early morning. So between the hours like 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. If you are watering at night, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, 1 a.m., that stays wet all night long. And with your grass staying wet all night long, you're very susceptible to get issues such as dollar spot. So the biggest takeaway, if anything you've learned during today's class, zoysia, like all of our grasses here in the north central area of the state, want to go dormant. As the head landscaper out on top of the world will say, brown is a color too. If your lawn looks like this in the wintertime, you are doing the right thing, okay? You want to have a brown lawn in winter. We do have many folks who move to Florida and think that we are the tropics and that it should be green and lush year round. South Florida, yes, that is the case. And Marion County, North Central Florida, Sumter, Lake, Alachua, all in that area, no. Our area all goes dormant. So you should see this. This is a good thing. So yay, good brown lawn. We're happy, okay? So that is a good thing. Let your lawn go dormant. Some pests. So usually the pest issues tend to be less than the disease issues. I have a lot of experience with zoysia around here, and I have yet to come across a hunting billbug. I also teach landscapers, and of all of the classes I've asked them if they've run into hunting billbugs, I've only ever had one person that said that they had. Usually the hunting billbugs are more of an issue further north. I know in areas like North Carolina, which is where this photo was taken, in North Carolina, the hunting billbug is a severe problem. Not to say they can't become a worsening issue here, but right now is kind of one of those things to be aware of, but it's not a major issue like further north in the Panhandle and in North Carolina, okay? One issue we do run into a lot around here are nematodes. They usually, though, affect stressed out grasses. So nematodes are these little microscopic roundworms that do this. They can actually create or cause root rot. The unfortunate side to the nematodes is there's very few, if any, nematicides right now available for treatments on lawns. There's nematicides available for golf courses and areas like that, but right now they're having an issue with manufacturing for nematicides for residential lots. It's also a restricted use pesticides. They're very expensive and very harmful. So nematicides are only available to licensed landscapers, and it is very expensive to treat if they do find an active ingredient that can help treat for nematodes. Mole crickets tends to not be a big issue. White grubs, it can be. I've only seen it be an issue a couple of different times. Usually the grubs, which are these nasty looking things, usually the grubs become a problem when the lawn is over irrigated. Okay, so when the grass is stressed, over irrigation, that's when you tend to get these guys. Okay, also lights kept on the lawns, like security lights or porch lights. those can actually attract both the mole crickets and the beetles that are attracted to the lights at night. So by cutting off your lights on your porch if you can, even though, again, people use it for security reasons, those lights, at least during peak, beetle activity, by cutting those off, you can actually reduce the likelihood of these guys becoming an issue. The biggest thing here is avoid broadcast spraying pesticides. If you have a landscape company, they may come out like every month or so and spray. And when we ask homeowners, what are they spraying for? I'm like, I don't know. Bugs. We really don't know. Only spray when you actually have a known pest issue. There's a major problem right now with pest resistance. So these bugs are actually becoming resistant to pesticides, and you're killing off the good guys that could be predators. So only spray when you actually do know you have an issue, okay? So, and that leads us into chinch bugs. So folks who have zoysia think, oh, well, I have zoysia, I won't have an issue with chinch bugs like people with St. Augustine. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Chinch bugs do also attack zoysia. This is a photo of a very healthy chinch bug adult that I took from a zoysia lawn here in Marion County. So this is the adult, and the babies, the nymphs, are a bright orangey red color. So St. Augustine is their favorite host, but if you've got a whole street of zoysia, it's very likely you'll end up finding chinch bugs there as well. The damage can be very severe, but usually only attack those drought-stressed lawns. So really the biggest thing is making sure if you do have to irrigate, like March, April, and May. March, April, and May, we tend to be really hot and really dry in our part of the state. That is when your grass can really start to get stressed out by drought. So make sure your irrigation is working properly. You don't have what's called hot spots, which tends to be at the end of a driveway or end of a sidewalk where the irrigation's not quite hitting. And the cement and the asphalt really release a lot of heat. So usually where we see chinch bug damage start is along those hot edges of driveways and sidewalks where the irrigation may not be quite hitting right. So you'll see thinning out yellow to brown patches that start to expand. So if you question if you have chinch bugs, have your landscaper come out, look for them. They're really easy to find, or reach out to us and we can come out and take a look too. Their peak season is in the summer. So usually we're getting enough rain, you can really reduce your irrigation back. But if for whatever reason we've got, like a month or two of really hot, dry weather in the summer, that's when you need to be on the lookout for these guys. Also, like I said, make sure you dethatch. A thick layer of thatch is where these guys love to live, eat, and breed. So make sure you're dethatching about once every 1 to 2 years, or when that thatch layer gets about ½ an inch or more thick. Okay. Avoid over fertilizing, which can also, again, increase the likelihood of disease as well as chinch bugs, and check your irrigation uniformity. So here's just some fun little quiz. So pop quiz. What is the issue here? Okay. So first, we do know a lot of our diseases and pests cause patches. Do you see patches here? No, not really. I mean, here a little bit. But what do you notice? Perfectly linear lines. No pest, no disease is going to cause perfectly linear lines. This was a homeowner that called us out, concerned that she did have an issue. Unfortunately, the issue was her landscaper. What we came to figure out is either the landscaper was mowing with too heavy of equipment. This was done, I want to say back in April or May. So it's hot and dry, your grass is under stress. The lawnmower was too heavy and the tire marks killed the grass in these perfectly linear lines. Or what's more likely is he had a leak. So while he was mowing, he may have had herbicide that had a leak. So everywhere he went, he was carrying herbicide and killing the grass. So this was just a little pop quiz. If you see a perfect squares or lines, that is a human caused error, not from pest or disease. So what does Zoysia want to be happy from you? So number one, don't overfeed it. Number two, this is the biggest thing, don't overwater it. Keep its hair cut short. Zoysia wants it mowed short, about 2.5 inches. And yes, patience and understanding is key, particularly with Zoysia being relatively lazy. It will take time for it to recover if you do end up with an issue. With the fertilizing, make sure that you only fertilize when the grass is actively growing. So this is critically important for Zoysia, particularly to avoid that issue with large patch. So you don't want to fertilize before April 15th. If your landscaper comes out and fertilizes, early April, okay, that's fine. If the landscaper is coming out and fertilizing in February and March, that is when you're going to have an issue. So if anything, you're wasting your money. The grass is still dormant, okay? So if you are fertilizing in February or early March, almost all of that fertilizer is washing right out into the aquifer. You are simply wasting your money. Your Zoysia will not start actively growing until early to mid-April. The recommendation used to be, mid-March, like March 15th. But what they showed, particularly with Zoysia, is come March, yes, the shoots may be growing, but it takes the roots a little bit longer to really start going. So peak growing season, as you can see, is summer. This is when the grass will absorb 99.9% of the fertilizer you put down, if put down appropriately. So when it's actively growing, April 15th at the earliest. Now, what is really important to avoid that large patch, do not fertilize your Zoysia much past October 1st, okay? If you fertilize, a week or two past October 1st, you're okay, but you're getting into that window when Zoysia particularly is starting to go dormant. So aim for no later than October 1st. If you fertilize later than that, you are encouraging your Zoysia to grow later into that dormant season, and that is really when it can start getting hit by large patch and some other issues, okay? So it wants to go dormant pretty early. So by early November, it should be asleep. We want to let it sleep, let it go brown, okay? Potassium is fine. So if your landscaper is out fertilizing past October 1st, have that conversation with them. Any legitimate licensed landscaper should know, and they should also know that it's illegal to be applying nitrogen and phosphorus during the winter months. Just ask them, just have that conversation with them. If they do just potassium, that's fine. Potassium is not a pollutant. Even an extra dose of potassium and during that October feeding will really help those roots grow and sustain through the cold winter months. So potassium is okay. Iron is okay. It's just really that nitrogen and that phosphorus that is critical. Nothing past October 1st. The University of Florida does not recommend the use of weed and feed products. The reason for that is the timing is off. There's many weed and feed products on the market. So it's hard to make a blanket statement, but in this case, the University of Florida does. They just say, just avoid weed and feed products. Usually they have fertilizer, but they also have an herbicide, usually a pre-emergent herbicide, which is great to prevent weeds. But for pre-emergence to work, you usually need to apply it right around February 15th. Is February 15th too early to fertilize? Yes, okay. So if you wait until April 15th to fertilize, the herbicide is not going to do any lick of good. So you see what I mean? The timing for one or the other is wrong. So separate out the two. Do a pre-emergent in February to prevent those summer weeds. Fertilize in April. Same thing in the fall. You can put down a pre-emergent, October 31st. but make sure you fertilize nothing past October 1st. So separate out the two to get that timing right. Okay. We do recommend slow release granule fertilizers 2 to 3 times a year and you're done. If your landscaper's coming out once a month to fertilize, again, ask them what they're doing, what they're using, because more than likely it's a quick release water soluble fertilizer, which means one good heavy rain and most of that fertilizer is gone. We recommend the slow release granules that will spoon feed. They're going to slowly spoon feed that grass all during the growing season so that it's getting a steady nutrient dose all summer long. That's what you want. Not this, sudden, all you can eat buffet, quick release, and then it's gone. Yeah, that's not going to do anybody really any good. So, and if they're fertilizing and it gets a heavy rain, again, most of that's gone. So recommend, it might be a little bit more expensive, but it's worth your money for sure to ask for that slow release granule fertilizers. Your watering, this is the #1 issue with lawn care, is overwatering. You want to aim for about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. If you have no idea what depth you're getting, there's a test called the catch can test. We can certainly help you with that. I partner with Marion County Utilities. We do offer irrigation consultations. If you are out on Top of the World or Stone Creek, Bay Laurel is your utility. They can also help you with this. They can provide the catch cans to really calibrate your irrigation system. So ideally getting that 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so that is ideal. I did see a pop-up, Alachua County, there's a fertilizer ban. Yes, there is. I'm glad you mentioned that. So the fertilizer ban. Unfortunately, IFAS fought it. They fought it over and over and over again. The fertilizer bans that you see go against the science. You saw it. The active growing season is summer. This is when you should be fertilizing. Unfortunately, legislators, both in Alachua County and other counties, hopped on and clung on to the statement that no, you should not fertilize before a heavy rain, which is correct. But the time to fertilize is when the grass is actively growing, which is in the summer. So if you do live in areas with the fertilizer ban, unfortunately, we are probably going to see repercussions of that down the road because it is encouraging folks to fertilize early in the spring when you don't want to, and it's encouraging to fertilize in the fall, which again, nothing past October 1st. So unfortunately, we're more than likely going to see repercussions of that fertilizer ban down the road. So that is all I have to say about that. But yes, thank you for reminding me, check your local ordinances because there may be a ban in your area. Marion County, thankfully, has not enacted one yet, and they hopefully won't. Okay, so irrigate. Remember, the dollar spot likes the leaf wetness all night long. So if you can, the best time to irrigate is between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. Okay, after 8 a.m., the sun comes up, it dries off that leaf blade, and everybody is good and happy. Okay, never irrigate more than 2 times a week. That is so important, especially in the rainy summer months and in the winter. We've had landscapers actually tell homeowners, oh, your grass isn't getting enough water. That's the problem. Oh, go ahead and water 4 times a week. And we come out and the grass is gone. The roots have totally rotted out because it wasn't an issue of not enough water. On the flip side, that's the issue with root rot. The grass will start to turn brown and crispy and curl up because the roots aren't functioning. So on the surface, you think, oh, it needs more water, but in actuality, the roots are gone. That's why it's acting the way it is. Plus, it's against water management district rules to water more than 2 times a week, unless, of course, you've got a brand new sod. Okay, so never more than 2 times a week, preferably less than that. Summer months, you can really turn your system off. That is the best practice. Some folks will say, well, I have a rain shutoff device, which is great. It's legally required to have a working rain shutoff device. Unfortunately, most of them don't work. 8 months max, and they usually stop working. So you are the smartest controller. So don't utilize your rain shut-off device as the just set and forget it. You have to make sure it's working, but preferably just turn your system off. And so you're not overwatering, unfortunately, because you thought, oh, it's working, and it's not. So turn your system off during the rainy season. If you are gone during the summer months, many of you will leave and come back. That's okay. Set your system on for once a week. That way you're good and covered. If we have a real hot week without any decent rain, once a week will be fine. Also, those of you who are gone for long periods of time, please, please, please make sure you have a friend or a relative or a neighbor to check on your system frequently. We have seen irrigation heads broken off and shooting water straight into the attic all summer long, and they come home to a mold-ridden house. So A, it's a waste of water, 2, very expensive, and 3, you can end up with major mold issues. So definitely make sure you have somebody checking on your irrigation system frequently. You yourself, check it. You know, these heads get ran over by lawnmowers, they get bent, they get cracked. Check your system, you know, once a month, if not more frequently. Go out before it gets too hot, run your system manually, and just make sure everything's working properly. I can't tell you how often we'll do irrigation consultations. We'll run the system and there's literally a geyser and the homeowner has no idea. So check your system and only water on an as needed basis. Mowing and dethatching, you must dethatch your lawn. This thatch is right here. So this is the thatch layer. It's really just a buildup of old runners. Leaving the grass clippings on the grass is beneficial. It does not contribute to thatch like many people think, but it's just the nature of the grass. Zoysia and St. Augustine, they both do it, just the nature of the grass. It's just this buildup of, you know, old blades, particularly of old runners. So this thatch layer is about 1 inch thick. So yes, it's time to dethatch this lawn. Zoysia, if mowed properly, which is 2 to 2.5 inches, and you do what you don't over fertilize, it will reduce your chance of building up thatch quickly. But you know, it's like going to the doctor, you know, getting your annual checkup about once every year, every 2 years, you want to dethatch. Just a good general practice. Avoiding overwatering, over fertilizing will help reduce your chance of that. Okay. Aeration as well. This is also very important, particularly those of you who live in those areas, new neighborhoods, particularly a lot of clay with compacted soils. Aeration is really also very helpful to encourage a healthy lawn. You know, once every 1 to 2 years during the growing season, go ahead, dethatch and aerate, and that'll be a much healthier lawn in the long run. And then, of course, lastly, that patience and understanding. Remember, your zoysia is actually pretty slow growing compared to some of the other grasses. So those fungal diseases, particularly the root rots and large patch, they will take time. The take-all root rot is probably the worst. That can take a full year before your lawn really fully recovers. So the fungicides, again, work better as preventatives rather than as treatments. So if you're doing it yourself, always follow the label instructions, alternate active ingredients if you can. And do know if you have a disease 1 year, it's really good to have a conversation with your landscaper to get them to start applying fungicides as a preventative the following year, okay? So for example, root rot, it starts during the rainy season. Have them start putting down preventative fungicides in like March or April, okay? Large patch, it usually starts in October. Have them start putting down preventative fungicides, you know, September or October, okay? And we can help them with that. That's what we do on a daily basis. We can help you guys or your landscapers. Insecticides, only use insecticides on an as needed basis. Spot treatment, we really try to discourage those broadcast sprays of pesticides. It just really encourages resistance to chemicals, but also you're killing off all those beneficials. You're killing off all the good guys that can actually help prevent some pest issues from the get-go, okay? So scout regularly, allow your zoysia time to fill in those bad spots, and really, really critical, allow your grass time to rest in the winter and be patient as it greens up in the spring, okay? We like to see brown grass in the winter. Remember that April 15th to October 1st, that is the time frame to fertilize. That is the optimal time when the grass is actively growing. Avoid that overwatering and just be cautious with the chemicals. We have seen, unfortunately, homeowners and landscapers severely damage the lawn by applying herbicides in like March or April when it's really very, very sensitive to chemicals. So just read that label instructions and use them sparingly. All right, so with that, are there any questions for me?
Thank you, Amanda.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, here is Amanda's email. Just before we take questions, I do want to remind attendees. So the water restrictions Amanda put there, it's Marion County. So check your local water restrictions because different water management districts may require have different restrictions. For example, if you're in South Florida, depends on the depends on the time of the year, you're allowed to water 3 times a week. But again, it's water restrictions. So we always say it's a not water recommendation. So it's just the top you should water is no more than 3 times. I mean, South Florida. Again, check your local ordinance and find out what's your irrigation restrictions. And now we will take some questions. So some of you may not, if you can open the Q&A session, and if you want to check the past questions, you can check answered. So we mentioned one question was about fertilizer ban. So I see Stacy Greco here. She commented, unfortunately, IFAS is taking research that was not designed to look at all forms of nitrogen and did not take homeowner behavior into account and is oversimplifying the results. Alachua County compiled a literature review, including the IFAS research that is overreaching and has a 400-page document that summarizes why the ban was adopted. She's happy to email it to interested participants. So actually, this is a really good question and a good comment. A couple of years ago, we did have a panel discussion just related to fertilizer ban. It's it's more complex than it is. It's from which standpoint. And in addition, just like Stacy said here, it's also human behaviors. So if you are interested in that report, email me and I will put Stacy's email in the chat box. Just email Stacy. And Amanda, do you have anything you want to comment on the fertilizer ban?
Yeah, no, just make sure you know your local ordinance. But again, with Zoysia particularly, the science is the science. Okay, we do know with Zoysia, you really shouldn't be fertilizing before early April or past October 1st. And ordinance regardless, that is the research. And we know particularly with Zoysia going dormant first and waking up last. Yes, you should never be fertilizing before a heavy rain, but unfortunately that ban makes it very difficult for folks to properly maintain the zoysia the way it wants to be. So we did have a question about someone who replaced their zoysia sod last week. The sod supplier advised to water 2 times a day for the first 1 to 2 weeks. And yes, that is correct. So the water recommendations that you just saw were for established lawns. So if they've been in the ground for 30 days or more, that is the recommendation. For your new sod, yes, you will definitely want to be watering based on their recommendations, which would be about twice a day, morning and afternoon. Okay, so that is correct. Okay. Don't mow for 3 weeks. Yeah, if it's a new sod, same thing. You want that sod to get well rooted in the ground. A good way to figure out if your grass is established or not, if it's rooted, if you tug on the sod. If you tug on it and it pretty much stays where it is, it doesn't really come up, you know, it's put down roots, and then you should be good to go to mow. But give it at least that 3 weeks, 4 maybe even at the most. But yeah, do that tug test and see if it's rooted or not. So, all right, I heard you say dethatch and aerate. Yes, during the growing season is correct. Both dethatching and aeration do actually cause a bit of damage. And because of that damage, it will be better for the grass to be able to heal itself while it's actively growing. I do know that some landscape companies do it while it's dormant. The fall would probably be more forgiving than the spring when it's really, really sensitive. Ideally, if they can aerate and dethatch when it's actively growing, that's best, because like I said, it can heal from the damage. But while it's dormant, that one, unfortunately, the recommendation is while it's actively growing. So let me see. My lawn and pest service sometimes says that they
Amanda,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So the first question, because for people watching recording, they are not able to see the question. Would you repeat the question first?
Yeah, their lawn and pest service was saying to aerate and dethatch while it's dormant instead. And we do hear that. Sometimes people will say, you know, well, my landscape company told me to do this during the dormant season. And it is okay. You're not going to kill the grass by doing it while it's dormant. It's not as hot, so it's easier for the landscapers, and they're not as busy during the dormant season. But it is better to both dethatch and aerate while the grass is actively growing, so it can heal from the damage that both cause. So, and again, it's nothing that's going to kill the grass. It's just it's better for it while it's actively growing. So. There was another question that said that their pest service sometimes says that they treat for army worms. Can you comment on that pest? Would they be considered as part of the nematode pest that you mentioned in your presentation? Okay, so army worms, yes, those can be a major issue. If they don't see the actual army worm though, if they're putting down pesticide and there's no army worm there, what are they treating for? Ultimately, they'll probably just be killing the beneficials, and the army worms can come by, you know, they can have multiple generations. So they're putting down chemical for no reason. So if they are treating for army worm, ask them if they found army worms, and then yes, that's a legitimate use of that pesticide. But if they're just putting it down as preventative, I'm sorry to say there's really not a preventative. The bug has to be there for the pesticide to actually work. Would they be considered as part of the nematodes? But no, the nematodes and the armyworms are two totally different things. The armyworms you can clearly see. The nematodes are microscopic, so you won't see those. So hopefully that answers your question. So. All right, any other questions? You guys do have my email as well if you've got any further issues. Those of you who live in Marion County, please feel free to come pay us a visit, send us samples, or bring in photos. If worse comes to worse, if we can't figure it out from photos or from samples, we're happy to also schedule some site visits for you too. So.
We do have one comment here and 2 more questions actually. One question popped in. I have another question. So it's from Stacy. Stacy is from Alachua County. So I put Stacy's email address in the chat box. If you are interested, you can ask, you can email her. And she put another comment here. I appreciate all that IFAS does and understand it is not simple and it's hard and expensive to have perfect studies. Thank you. And I have another, thank you, Stacy. I do have a question here. It's recently I got quite often. It's with all the raining season, with all the rain and the water is standing on the yard for extended period of time. Will that cause any issue like root rot for your zoysia grass?
Absolutely, yes. Zoysia, St. Augustine, Bahia, it doesn't matter. standing water where areas don't drain well can absolutely contribute to the root rot, which is why we usually see it in those swale areas, because by nature it's a low-lying area. So if it doesn't drain, if the water sits there, that's where you get the rot. There's not enough airflow around the roots. Some areas, if you have notorious issues with a spot not draining, some people will, if you get HOA approval, can actually take out the grass in those spots and put in these little rain gardens, which can be a lot of fun, add some diversity to the landscape. There can be rock or water-loving plants that can also tolerate water and dry. So things like irises, for example, we can certainly offer some recommendations. Or some folks have done drainage. They've actually installed underground drains. I think they're called French drains. That again, something you'd have to hire somebody to do or contact your HOA and get approval first. But you can put potentially the underground French drains in those spots to help with the drainage. There was a question, do you have recommendations for compatible alternative grass types that work well with zoysia on the north side that do not get the 6 hours of sun per day? So if you have an area that's not getting 6 hours of sun per day, we don't recommend grass. Okay, the St. Augustine will tolerate shade better than all of them. So St. Augustine, if you have to have grass in a shadier spot, St. Augustine, particularly Citra Blue St. Augustine or a dwarf cultivar, are the best at shade tolerance. But even still, they need about 5 hours of full sunlight to really be happy. Any less than that, they're still going to thin out and you'll end up with more weeds. So if it's dense, full-on shade, you may want to consider an alternative ground cover like the jasmine, the Ardisia jasmines, grasses, ornamental grasses that are shade tolerant. There's a whole host of shade tolerant plants as an alternative to grass. But other than that, St. Augustine is the only real option in those spots. And I do remember an email that you had sent me, Yelin, asking about the salt tolerance too with zoysia. St. Augustine would be the better alternative. St. Augustine along the coast has much better salt tolerance than zoysia. And last question, I am in Sumter County with zoysia. I recently replaced my original controller with an Orbit. Should I use a smart feature of the original? Okay. So the smart features, go ahead and use them, absolutely. What we are encouraging you is just don't just set it and forget it. You are the smartest controller, okay? These are computer systems. Some of the smart features rely on satellite data that they may be getting, you know, a couple of miles down the road. How many of y'all have seen it rain across the street, but not at your house? So you are the smartest controller. Go ahead, use the smart feature. Don't just set and forget it. Make sure you go out and frequently, at least once a month, check to make sure everything is working properly as it should. Okay. Any other questions?
I mute myself. That's all the questions we have, and the timing is great because we have 4 minutes left. I do want to let everyone know this time we focus on zoysia, and the next week, like Amanda mentioned in the presentation, another very popular turf grass in Florida we can find, especially Central Florida, we find is St. Augustine grass. So next Thursday, Amanda will give us some tips how to maintain your zoysia grass. So if you haven't registered, I put the blog, the webinar series blog, where you can find all the registration link. So it's in the chat box. Register for the webinar, and in that way you can also receive the handout and the link to the recording. So with that, I thank for your time. Thank you, Amanda, for this informative presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. So hope to see you next Thursday. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.